What do we do with all the content? Hi, my name is Rick Stirling, and in my day job, I'm the president of WesternIM here in Saskatchewan. WesternIM does all things records and information management for those that don't know us. On the ARMA side, I'm a director at large with the Saskatchewan Chapter, and currently on the ARMA International IGP, that's the Information Governance Professional Certification Exam Committee. My thanks to the ARMA Saskatchewan Chapter for allowing us to present the not only what do we do with all our content segment, but also a brief look at our WISPIR information inventory tool. And that's going to be presented by my partner, Troy Sawyer, who's also the lead developer at WesternIM. Now, back to content. I doubt if a single person listening to this presentation today can honestly say that they have a handle on 100% of their corporate content. And just to highlight that, I want to take a look at a discussion I've had with folks across the country over the last year about content. So let's start with paper and kind of work our way toward the electronic information side, which quite frankly is a lot scarier than the paper side. Discussion usually starts with policies. We talk about retention schedules, classification systems, and eventually we kind of find out about the paper. So most of the people I talk to who have a records professional on staff actually have a pretty good handle on their physical holdings. But if I ask them how long they've been dealing with records management in their corporation, most have personally not been there themselves as long as their records management program has been operating. For instance, the records management program may have been operating for 25 to 30 years, and the records professional has maybe only been there for 5 to 8. So at that point, I usually home in on how they keep their information at present and how it was done in the past. And usually, they have a lot of spreadsheets, different kinds of formats, different styles of information about their physical holdings. They could have a couple of databases, homegrown probably, and in a few cases, they actually have current electronic systems for their physical records. When I ask them if they've gone back to validate the old information against what's likely in boxes and lives off-site, the answer is usually no. Without validation, it's really unlikely that a corporation or government department would allow destruction of the physical information because nobody's really sure what's in the boxes. You wouldn't believe what I've seen in boxes and physical records over the last 25 years. When we get to the retention schedule and the classification system and how long it's been since they were updated, it usually far exceeds the kind of 2 to 3 year time frame that I would usually recommend. Policies about the same. Now, how about the electronic information? Many that I talk to have not dealt with electronic information at all. There are some basic attempts at cleaning up shared drives, but mostly the information is like the Wild West, with some or all of the following. Unorganized shared drives, you got Microsoft SharePoint sites rolled out by IT, without a lot of planning, I might add. Microsoft OneDrive, various USB drives, Google Docs, Outlook, Gmail, Dropbox, Box, Office 365, and the newest one I hear all the time is Microsoft Teams. And the list goes on and on. It actually seems to me sometimes that a new platform gets rolled out when an old one becomes a mess that nobody wants to fix anymore, or support, I might add. I think we can all agree that when we don't know what we have, we can't organize or deal with it at all. On top of all that, the corporate mantra that I hear all the time is digital transformation, although it never seems to mean the same thing to two people in a row. Just before I turn you over to Troy, my partner Troy, for a look at our WISPIR tool, Here's a quick outline of how it came to be. The original code was developed several years ago now, essentially out of self-defense, I might add, since we were doing a 100,000 plus, yes, 100,000 plus box inventory project for a client. This content lived in over 100 locations. It's probably unlikely that most of you have anything that size of physical inventory to deal with, and be grateful for that. Once that particular project was over, we did a follow-on project right away for another client with a warehouse full of paper. And at the end of that, we decided we should probably do something with the code, since very few suppliers were actually working with physical information anymore. So at that point, WISPIR was actually born. Although it started out as a physical inventory tool, it has turned into a veritable kind of Swiss Army knife-like tool for content in both physical and electronic form. Spans most of the content types that we all wrestle with on a regular everyday basis that I spoke about briefly before. So WISPIR's a passive tool, means that we only bring in metadata and folder structure, but not actual documents, which helps a lot from the security standpoint. We don't bother either the users or the IT folks, so all of you IM professionals can work in the background on your own schedule to get things done with no one disturbing you, hopefully. Now, here's a bunch of jobs that WISPIR is actually already doing, just to give you an idea of the scope, is physical inventory and validation, reporting on disposition of physical records, reorganizing shared drives, attaching classification and retention information to existing corporate electronic sources. It's always a good one. Data mapping of electronic information. Cleanup of both physical and electronic information so that's ready for migration. Same as above. Lots of different platforms, lots of different jobs. Just a small list of those things that it's doing thus far. And just a quick introduction to my partner, Troy Sawyer. As I said earlier, he is the lead developer. He is a very smart guy when it comes to rolling and migrating information here, there, and everywhere. And I think you'll really enjoy the WISPIR tool. Over to you, Troy.
Some of the things that we'll look at later on and that we'll kind of relate back to, especially on the panel, I have some questions that we can kind of follow up with, kind of just have a main line that we can all use to discuss some of these things. And then we'll get into the WISPIR. For the most part, when I'm going to talk at the beginning here, I'm going to focus on the what and how things are done. What is the content? How do we do some of these things like digital transformation or classify? How do we do those things? And I was thinking that the panel part of it would be more of the why and who. Like, why do we do these things? Who are the people involved? And then that kind of leaves the when. The when is always an interesting conversation that I think kind of fits into both. When do we do this? Another thing that falls under when would be how much. So how many people are being involved in these projects? How much content? What content? Is it all of our physical records? Is it all of our shared drives? Is it all of our SharePoint? So that's how I'll kind of break it down. So let's start with the results from the survey. It looks like we had 10 people send in some answers from this. I believe this was multiple choice where you could select any number of these, most of this being around the physical stuff. I'll kind of just start at the top. Rick had mentioned some of this shared drive stuff. Currently, I think everybody can kind of relate to the shared drive idea where there's probably a source of information out there that, or even the OneDrive is some kind of falls into the shared drive as well. A lot of times, like Rick was saying, content gets away from us. We'll do something to put an organizational structure in place, then we let users touch it, and then that all goes at the door, right? So what can we do to handle when that happens? How can we do things that help users to be able to adhere to our policies within an organization, and how some tools, things like WISPIR, can help us with that. Not too much around, nobody said anything about C drives or actual individual drives. kind of surprising, but like Rick was saying, a lot of people are kind of going to the OneDrive and stuff like that. So that's probably where this content is actually falling under. USB keys. Often with USB keys, what we're seeing is that the problem is that it's not always connected to somewhere where we can monitor it. They're taken offline, stuff's changed on them, it comes back, it plugs back into the computer. We'll look at how the Whisper can help inventory that and keep track of kind of what stuff is going on there as well. Dropbox, and I'll also put this under Box as well. Some of these online cloud-based solutions for us to store data, similar to the OneDrive idea. How can we get content from there? How can we put it back? And how do we add value to unstructured data that's sitting out there on these drives? SharePoint. SharePoint is obviously the big one, and this is kind of going to be, I'll focus a lot around showing what this looks like in SharePoint to and from, and how we add value to team sites, for example. One of the things we're seeing a lot of is IT will send out a team site, that project will finish. What do we do afterwards? That's always a big one, especially for the records management type people in the room. That's something that we're kind of responsible for, and we can't just leave it out there. And IT doesn't want us to leave it out there. And what can we do to help with those things? Outlook, some of the content I'll look at today will be emails. We will stay out of an email system. We do have an Outlook connector for Documentum that we use for a lot of our email filing and stuff. But we'll stay within Whisper and the electronic side of what an email does if it's in one of these other contexts for today. If we have some time, we can take a look at Outlook as well. Microsoft Teams. The interesting things around project management and things like Teams and that type of content in the terms of what we want to do with it and how important it is to us as an organization might not be very clear right from the get-go. We always want something to hang on to say this is a piece of content, where a lot of times our content and the information we're trying to govern here is not necessarily in a paper document or a Word document, and things like the information we can get from Teams and our project management kind of software is pretty important. That kind of falls under legacy databases, anything that's kind of a database driven kind of view. We'll take a look at how we can add value to that. Instant messaging, text messaging. Whisper does have a mobile app. We probably won't get into it today, but this is something that kind of falls within email as well. But how do we use this content in terms of our adding value to our organization? OpenText content server. Actually, the most recent instance of content server that came up was a bunch of municipalities, actually. It seems like a lot of people are having content server problems because the migration tools to get content in are not very adaptable to things like very deep folder structures. Very deep folder structures comes up very often, especially on the IT side. How do we get to that folder path limit? What do we do? How can we get information away from folder paths too? As a human, when we read through a folder path, usually the people filing will put it in there for some reason, right? It says administration, and I've got an administration document here, so I'm putting it here so that we can use that information to help us add value to the content at the end. I'll demonstrate some of that. Mfiles, we've actually been doing a lot of work with Mfiles recently. We've had a partnership with them now. We actually started using it internally for our outwards correspondence for people to be able to access content we want to get outside of our organization. There's a couple other solutions out there like ShareFile. A lot of our repositories and that are in-house and users have to log in to access that content. But things like Mfiles can give us the capability to collaborate outside the organization. So it's been pretty interesting working with the Mfiles. Talked about Box. Legacy databases. Now this is a big one Whisper's done quite a bit of work in. The main thing that's happened here is sometimes IT will want to stop supporting a legacy database, say it's an old Access database. Keeping those up to date from version to version is the hugest headache. Every IT guy, it's like, I don't want to deal with it is usually what comes up, right? Like I've got my other responsibilities. How do I help my records management or the people that are responsible for this information be able to continue using their legacy information? I've done lots of stuff around that and how we can, again, it might not necessarily be a physical document we're dealing with. It might be a line in a database, but we still want that information. And and it's very important at the end too to say, we have policies inside that a line item in a database might be just as important to put a policy to as a document on our hard drives, right? Or a document in our boxes in the record center. So there was actually one response here that I had a couple of things in here we'll talk about I thought were really interesting. Digital workspace strategies that kind of falls into, might not necessarily be the documents that we're dealing with, but the workplace, meetings, when that meeting happened is a legitimate piece of information we want to keep as an organization. We can put things in place to help with those. Metadata models. I'll talk about some metadata models and some projects that we've come up against that have been challenging and things that I like to do with clients to try to separate out some of the ways we specify what metadata we want associated with our content. We'll talk about some things that are more functional based and some things that are more traditional records classification based. E-discovery process. This is always tough because like Rick was saying, we will go in and maybe the project was to do this certain type of thing, but then you get there and like, well, what about this closet over here? What about this shared drive over here? How do we help discover that information, not just from what we know we have and then find the information within it, but help identify. And that's more of a people thing, not a technology thing. Change management. Change management, I think this is one of those things we'll talk about in the panel. The why and who is kind of where this falls under what do we do to help users access our information, use the information, give them the procedures to be able to adhere to our internal policies. And then at the end of the day, an end user, what do we do to help an end user get a document into a classification without them knowing anything about records management? Right. Good. Any questions to that? So we kind of move on. Okay, let's go back to the metadata thing. Like I was saying, one of the things we like to do in Whisper, and some people will think about this in different ways. There are two main areas I like to work with clients to be able to help identify what metadata is important to us to add value to our content. The first way I like to look at it is functionally, and that's in a traditional sense. That's like we have an HR department, we have a finance department. Within those they have committees, and then within those committees they might have activities. Traditional department function activity kind of hierarchy, but that doesn't necessarily that's what works for everybody. The functional organization might be something like District A are working with offshore drilling for one. One of the organizational breakdowns was the client doing the drilling. So Shell Corp was one of their, it wasn't administration, it was Shell Corp. And then what is Shell Corp doing and what's their activities, right? What's the functions that Shell Corp doing and what's their activities? And that's how they had their functional organization. It wasn't an internal one, it was more based around their assets and the content within their assets. Then kind of moving on to the next thing, in the more traditional sense, at the records level, what we like to do is go back to more of the traditional records classification. This is a finance document. We have some legal citations, some legal things that we have to adhere by for how long we keep these documents. And generally we put that kind of at the content level. So we're required to keep this for 7 years. And often there is correlation between that functional organization and the records classification. A lot of people will have their functional organization match their records classification, especially those who like to do the record series kind of classification. Their structures, functional structure will line up with their records classification. And I'll kind of show how both of those will come into play when we look at some of the Whisper stuff. Okay, what is content? Let's start with that before we actually go into Whisper. I got a couple of things here. I got a couple of SharePoint sites, some OneDrives, a couple of sample documents. I'll kind of just scroll through a couple of these and see some of the pain points some people might actually be able to relate to. First one here, just a sample box inventory. This was a kind of physical inventory of clients had all their information in spreadsheets. And they're like, well, I've got an inventory of everything, but there's no value to me, where if I need to find something that's in one of these boxes, having to scroll through spreadsheets is quite a pain, right? So how do we take this? In this sense, it's not too unstructured, but how do we put this into a place that we can access this information quickly, right? So I just kind of wanted to show some worst case scenarios. So this will be a spreadsheet I'll actually come back to later, and we'll actually import this into Whisper and show how that lines up. We've got some classifications and some dates in here. All of this is important information, but how do we add value to it? We'll go on to another one here. Our classification, this will be something that we want to use when it comes to our content. A lot of us will probably have internal documents that have these retention schedules. You know, how long we keep stuff for, what is the actual name of it. Here, this is, let's calendar year, keeping for 7 years, and at the end, we're going to destroy it. And here's kind of the information associated with it. So managing content, not everyone's going to be a records manager. So how do we also kind of line this up with the content that we're, say we're going to put into Whisper here? At the end of the day, if our summer student puts in a part of a shared drive that we already know is going to be this classification, let's not tell them they have to worry about what the classification is. How can we give it to them right at the get-go? So this would be something. This is content as well, even though this is more of the policies that govern our content. This document would also kind of be considered as content as well. We're talking about some of the warehouse stuff that we often have to deal with in the physical sense. This is some geological stuff, core samples and things like that. This is content too. How do we add a value to what's here? Kind of laid back to that functional organization I was talking about, that hey, this is not administration documents at all, right? This is functionally within the organization relating to something totally different. Let's give it some metadata and put it into a system in a way that makes sense for what we're actually dealing with when it comes to content. This is just one of the recent whiteboard things we do. This is probably the tamest one I've ever seen. But usually we have things like this that'll come out of us trying to establish what our functional structure will be, you know, who's responsible. We see some names here. Usually there's a lot more sticky notes associated with these whiteboard sessions. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to show some of this other stuff. Going into a little bit more of the actual electronic content. Well, let me just, some sample documents here. This is a sample area we'll use a little bit later. And I hope people can kind of identify this, whether it's your drive or somebody or somewhere in your organization, where there's just documents everywhere. And how do we deal with this, right? Some places might actually be structured in a way where we have our information organized in functionally or classification wise, but how do we distinguish that from one type of document to another? So we'll actually come back to this and do a scan against this and do some interesting things on this. I got 2 SharePoint sites. We'll look at a SharePoint Online and a SharePoint On-Prem. I'm just going to refresh this page because it's probably sleeping. Okay, it's done. So here, this one's going to be online. We'll look at getting information from this, adding some more information, and then also putting it back into a couple of scenarios with different SharePoint sites. So here, this will be an area we look at as well. Again, a lot of times, just whether it's shared drive, SharePoint, my drive, my thumb drive, we're often dealing with messes like this. And how do we kind of alleviate going from one mess to another? Rick kind of alluded to this earlier, where everybody often thinks that, hey, let's buy some software. It's like, you can give anybody a hammer, but I'm not building my dream home tomorrow, right? So just because we went from a shared drive to a $100,000 EDRMS system, junk in, junk out, right? So what can we do in the steps in between to add value? Okay, so we'll come back to a lot of these stuff here. Any questions? Yeah, anything else? Not so bad? Okay. Okay. So I'll just hop into Whisper and kind of just give an overview of kind of what's happening here. For the main idea of content within Whisper is, like, we like to try to organize things in a little bit of a content container type view. content can also be the container, just to kind of elaborate on that. But you can all, just the simplest term, usually we'll have a box that has file in it. We'll have a folder on a shared drive. We'll have a cabinet with documents in, or a shelf with stuff on it, a SharePoint site with things in it. So on the left hand here, I just have a kind of list of all my containers. So most of these are boxes here. You can see some of these are electronic folders. We have a whole bunch of different types of content in here. We have boxes, cabinets, personnel. Our content might actually fall under a person, just because we're used to seeing a box. A person, we did this actually in Barbados, HR in Barbados, where they had a huge shared drive of all scanned stuff. They did a great scanning project and then put it all onto shared drives. And what we did is they did a pretty good job of putting the information they wanted from it in that folder structure. So we could get like the student number, or the employee number, the employee name, and then get the content associated with them. But we didn't want to put it back into a folder structure. We wanted to put it in that the container was Troy, and here's his lead forms, here's his CV and all that kind of information. That might be the way we want to look at our content container. So here, I think I've got one here for Rick. Yeah, so here's one for Rick. I don't think we have any. Okay, so here we have, Rick didn't have any content with his, but here you can see I've got 2 documents associated with me that are actually on the shared drive. So to elaborate on this is that if we made our container me, we might have physical stuff that's mine. We might have electronic documents. We might have stuff on SharePoint. Let's group that in a way functionally that the person is what's driving how we're getting our content. And we can do this in a number of different ways, and we can link it different ways, but just kind of wanted to elaborate on our containers might not necessarily have to be physical containers. Shelves, that's some employee information. Wells, so we're talking about some offshore drilling. So just like we were looking at in that, looks like I don't have any content in those. I'm just going to go over here and see if I have any actual core samples. No, okay, we don't have any core samples in here, but the well might be the container. So with the offshore drilling, they had core samples, they had fluid samples, they were on different shelves in different places. We associated that location with them, but then at the end of the day, it's all associated with that location where the well actually exists. So just something to think about. So let's hop back here. I'm gonna pick a box here. So I like to use, I think this box has got some stuff in it. I have a feeling I cleaned out some stuff this morning and a bunch of stuff is missing. Okay, so here's 232. Let me find a better example. Let's go to electronic folders. All this stuff here, you can see I scanned it in from that Troy's PCs thing. I've got a couple of duplicates here. We go into here, we have a whole bunch of to-do ones. I'm just trying to find this one that we want to put administration to. You can see here, when we brought this stuff in, we'll look at actually how this got in here in a little bit. But here you can see on my drive, I actually have this being scanned in from a place, and we've associated with this here with the actual administration. So when I was showing that thing on our shared drive here, we had part of our scan here actually was an administration's meetings document, boards meetings. And this, when we brought it in, actually automatically put it into our department function and activity. So we can actually associate things that people are doing today, retrieve that information and put more value to it rather than just a ad hoc folder structure. That goes with classifications as well. Things like often people just simply name contracts, something contract in the name. Not everything's going to be that way, but 80-20 rule here is let's get all that stuff that we can identify right from the get-go and put valuable information to that. So let's go over to my electronic tab here. This is where we're going to kind of see some of the magic happen, for lack of a better term, where I've kind of made some, I call them electronic profiles here. We have on the left, I've got a OneDrive source, a couple SharePoint sources, that PC Troy area, that's going to be our sample documents. And from here, with our scan and our rules behind the scenes, we won't go into the technical on how to make some of those rules, but you can see we've got that source over here. How does it look after we've added our metadata, our functional organization, our records classification to this? what does it kind of look like on the other end? So I'll kind of drill down into the meetings here. Meetings. So on the right-hand side, I can see that under administration, this middle area is what we've built from the metadata we've given it. So we've got our functional organization with the department, function, and activity driving our folder structure in the middle here. But really, that document actually lives somewhere on the shared drive. So this is kind of comes to the when section here. When do we actually do something with this? The users can continue staying where they are, staying on that SharePoint site, and we're doing this passively. We're not moving the documents into Whisper. They're still on the shared drive until we're ready to do something with them, whether it's lock down this or migrate into a ERMS, or we'll show some areas here where we can add more value by getting the classification on some of these documents. We can find out things that are really old, for example, things that haven't been touched on our shared drive for 10 years, and our longest policy is 7, for example. Probably not, but you can say, hey, just show me everything that's 10 years or older. Let's do something with that today. So how can we add value to this? So unorganized on the left, how do we restructure it in the middle here? And then we can kind of navigate through and see where it exists on our shared drive, where it exists in our new functional organization, and the information associated with it. Just want to move this up a little bit. Okay, so let's actually look at something a little bit more specific here. At the bottom, I've got a little bit more specific, smaller sample here where I've scanned in a different area. And here we can see I actually brought in, here I was talking about contracts, for example. This was brought into a contract, and as an organization, we have our retention schedule, for example, for the records people. Now we've gone from the functional down to the records classification, and this one we've classified as legal 02. And because of that document we were talking about earlier, I showed just the finance part of it. This has some life cycles associated with how long do we keep it. And we can actually calculate those dates here. And let me just scroll over to the side here. We can see projected dates being associated with this one. I think that legal one, this contract is going to be event driven. So that policy is not going to start until we specify an event. We have the capability of grabbing some of these event dates from things like contracts as well. But here, so I'm going to say the event was today, and we'll save it here. And now we should probably have a projected date for that. So in 2026, I have a contract on my shared drive, and now I have some policy applied to it, right? Without having to move that document out of the shared drive. That goes for SharePoint as well. So we've got, so this is my SharePoint. So this is my on-prem version of it. So I'll drill down here. I'm not sure if I actually put, yeah, so I put some classifications, citizens files here. This one looks like it's event driven as well. But on our SharePoint site, the users using that team site, for example, have no understanding of what the records policies are of the corporation. But as a records manager, you know that, hey, that's a project going on in this area. How can I add some?
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
So if somebody changes something on the shared drive,
yep,
it will reflect in Whisper?
Yeah, so we give you, so this left-hand side, if you have access to it, this is a live view of it. This stuff that's synced into Whisper is you get to control. There's a sync button here. You can say when you want to update the information. We can put it on a schedule or that. Usually we give the people dealing with applying classification the ability to say, okay, show me what's new. Yeah. Everybody, one of the comments I always get from this as well is that people that are like folders don't like SharePoint. This gives you a tree view that you can click through that you're kind of used to on a traditional tree view kind of, and they love it just for the simple fact they can click through tree views from a SharePoint site. So, small thing.
Oh, can I ask another question?
Yep, go ahead.
So if you do move a document within your shared drive, will it retain the values you've assigned to it for retention?
So there's some interesting things that happen with how that works. So I always say you don't want to give somebody a loaded gun, because if somebody moves something, you still might want that information where it was to begin with. Mm-hmm. So we always try to be constructive with the sync. So we're always adding. We generally try not to take stuff out unless you specify to take it out. Now it has the capability to do it, but we always kind of err on the side of caution when we start, is we'll have it always be constructive, and then from there, if we have the requirement,
so
then we
would
put
add
in.
to, but to remove it, you would physically remove
Yeah,
it.
or we would turn on the job to be able to say, okay, anything that doesn't actually exist, let's clean those ones up and mark them deleted. Yeah, yeah. Yep. It's always interesting and things like that. When I look at some of the duplicate checking here, it's the same idea as, okay, we found all the duplicates and I've said which ones do I want to keep. Let's just hop into that now, because that kind of pertains to this. So this, I'm just going to run this. It just takes a second. I think I have about 1,000 files in this. It runs pretty quick. So this is just going to find duplicates. And what the duplicates here are file content duplicates. So the naming doesn't have to be the same. It's the actual, it's an MD5 hash of the actual contents of the document without actually reading the document. It's just a memory side thing. So all these documents could be named different. So here, I think this area here, these are all just blank spreadsheets that I created, and it found them all for me and said, hey, you've got, that's the 6168 is the standard template for Excel spreadsheet. They're all just blank. What would you want to do with these? So this gives you a view that you can take back to those people that maybe are responsible for this and say, okay, can you sign off to do with this? Is this something IT has to deal with? Again, we have the ability to move and merge. Now this is where I have it turned on here, but what we like to do with the duplicates is that we'll uncouple them and put them side by side. So at any point, if you're looking for a document that existed, that tree structure still exists on your shared drive and you can go find it in your duplicates area. But we separate it so that when you do decide on what you're keeping, whatever you do, the final process, you have that clean copy, but that duplicate lives side by side. So you can actually merge them back at any point and lay them over top of each other. Yeah, just an interesting technical behind the scenes thing. Yep. So here, let me hop over the content. This is just a flat view of the content. We're talking about, hey, let's see everything that's up for projected as of a certain date. Let me just do 2030 because that was that folder that we were looking at. So here's the contracts 2026. You can see here, these are Finance 02 documents. We have the capability of doing a whole fiscal year, calendar year kind of idea. And these projected dates are the fiscal year of April 1st for this particular configuration. But now that we're kind of getting some of this additional value information for this, how can we actually use it? It's kind of the idea. We have a couple of ways we like to report out of WISPIR. Essentially, the way I like to explain it is if you think of it this way. Left-hand side of the screen, this is my generate report. So anything I have on my left-hand side of the screen, if I jump to a different tab, that left-hand side of the screen is what I'm going to generate when I hit generate report. So it's all relative to what you're looking at. You filter down to say, I want to see just that 232 information. And if I hit generate report, this is what I'm going to get no matter what tab I'm on. So content, container, duplicates, it works on the duplicate tab. Let me just run this. This is just out of the box. I'll show you something a little bit nicer here in a sec. So you can see that I only had 2 files on my shared drive on the view there. So that's what came out of my spreadsheet. And this, we didn't really have much to this. So you can see where it was and all that. Obviously, people want to put these into something a little bit nicer. So the second one, we'll look at the right-hand side. We'll close this. So this right-hand side is the container information. So I'll just generate the container report and I'll actually use one of my templates here. So here I've got a template behind the scene and it's just populated the information into my Excel template. Some people are really good at doing some Excel stuff that I've seen some really fancy spreadsheets coming out of, not just a generic one that I put together here, but all the tools within Excel are still here for your report. So if you want to make pie graphs for stuff and all that kind of stuff, you can do some really interesting things here. But here, yeah, so we said, okay, I just wanted to see everything that was in this folder on the right-hand side. I had selected that March, which folder did I select? Yeah, March 2019. It looks like I don't have the name of the folder in here, but all the content. And this might be something that I say, I've generated it from my projected disposition. Here's the report. Now let's go to the manager of that department and say, I need your signature for getting, this is the stuff that's met its policy. Yep. And then the last one is just the content. So if I actually selected a piece of content, I don't think I have a template for this one. Yeah, I don't have a template, but it's basically the right-hand side with the particular piece of content that I'd selected. So we have all the information here for that one particular piece of content. Yeah. I showed kind of how to do that within the disposition tab here. I'll clear my filters, or in the content tab. This was a request, so I kept it in for my demos to have the additional filtering for projected date in the content tab. But generally, we'll do it in the disposition tab where we can save some of the results. I think these are all pretty old, actually. Yeah, these are all there, so let me just select that 2030 date and complete. So I've selected all the containers that are complete. So show me all the folders on the shared drive that have all the content that are incomplete. Maybe we don't want to deal with stuff on the file level. Maybe we want to say, let's just do on the folder level. If everything in that folder is met its projected date. Often we do that with boxes, right? If the box is ready to go, let me know when the box is ready to go. You can do that same kind of idea on a shared drive as well. Makes people like the ITs people happier not having to go file by file. Yeah. So again, that just takes you back to this one that was complete. Yeah. So that's kind of how that works. Like I had mentioned behind the scenes, the idea here is we want to kind of go from this mess of stuff into something that's a little bit more valuable that we can filter on, search on, and relate to, relate between things like people, departments, classifications, all that kind of stuff. So how do we get from this left to this middle kind of area? Now, what do we do with this? So, okay, that's great. We've generated some ports. We've done stuff like done a quick look at our duplicates. We've cleared those out. Our shared drive's getting pretty clean. We still have this mess, but we've at least identified some duplicates and some things that are more than 10 years old, and we've kind of cleaned it up down to what we see here in this middle, and we're kind of happy with that. What do we actually do from here? And that, a lot of times we'll have people that this is where they get to, and this is what they want to use. They have systems in place, they have SharePoint in place, they have shared drives in place, and that's what people are working on. That's what they want them to do. This is the passive tool that stays on top, and we let them continue to do that. But what do we do if we want to keep going forward? We got all this information, we got some classifications, we got some extra metadata, we can put some more description stuff on here. Maybe we've gone down, we can go down as far as, capturing on some of these files. If we actually go into the details, all this stuff can be used as well. Last access date. Some of this will be pretty important if we go into EDRMS that wants base dates. I'm not sure if people are familiar with that. It's basically, if you're coming from one source to another, when you import to a new system, often their create date is going to be the date you created in their system. That doesn't help you with your policies. So we want to capture things like creation date of files on the shared drive, and we want to make sure that gets put into the appropriate metadata field in our system so that our policy continues to go through its life cycle appropriately. It's often called base dates in those systems. So we can pull that out, and that might be our from date gets migrated to their legacy create date in our system. But let's kind of see how that looks like. So I've got a couple of exports that I've already done. Let me go into one here. I think some of these are kind of old, but here's my administration folder. So just to kind of show you, when I did this export, I just filtered down to administration. So I just exported my administration node. Maybe we have a new SharePoint site that's going to handle each one of our departments. We want to separate it out that way, or we're going to go into different areas of our other systems. So here I've lagging. There we go. So in there under my administration node, I've kind of did that export where I had that meetings, board meetings, I think is in here. So that's one of the folders that I had on my drive. So when we did that export, we took over just the administration department, our functional organization department as our filter, and imported it into shared drive. Now here we didn't add any additional information. We just brought them straight over. Same idea with the SharePoint Online. I think I did it under this test here. Yeah, as our administration, so maybe we're putting it into here. The same kind of idea. But we're actually working with another company in Ottawa right now that this is all they do. They actually share drives to SharePoint is what they do. That's all they do. And they have processes in place that they like right now to import into SharePoint. But all that stuff ahead of time that I showed before, this is where WISPIR is going to be their tool for all their projects. Yeah. So maybe we use those third-party import tools if necessary. But at the end of the day, here we get into another system. The other one too, I'll show here. Let me open up the doc. I know some people have Documentum. Let me open up Documentum. I have an export from a while ago here. Now the interesting thing I want to show with this one, I might not be able to show it all, but let me see if I can. So I did an export here. This was our full structure. This was done quite a while ago. With the same idea here, we had meetings here. So this is in a SharePoint site. Now this kind of comes back to that base state thing. We would have imported stuff as a legacy base state. But what we also did with this one is that in order to apply the policies within this Documentum system, we actually went as far as linking them to retention controlled areas. I don't know if people are kind of familiar with this, some of the ARMA systems. That functional organization we talked about is what people file to, but then behind the scenes, the records managers had their records classification in a different structure, and the documents were linked there to in order to inherit their policies, so that things could live anywhere in their folder structure. Finance could have, you know, legal documents and administration of finance documents, but at the end, we want them to be linked to these retention controlled areas to inherit their policies within this system.
So that kind of sounds like it's the difference between an intellectual classification or filing system and then the actual physical one.
Yeah.
Intellectually, you can design it any way you want, that it makes sense, and physically have it different.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And it works the other way too. Some people like to have that direct correlation, but like you're saying, users, at the end of the day, how do we make it easier for the users? And that usually makes more sense to go that route. Yep. The other interesting thing we've done with this as well, under my finance documents here, we've done things where we often run into issues, people using Excel spreadsheets. So within Excel spreadsheets, you're linking to other Excel spreadsheets. And as soon as you leave that filing system it's in and put it into another one, all those links break. So we've actually put some tools in here to say, hey, when I put this in, go back and go into those documents. You just imported both those documents. Now go into each one of those and make sure that the links that were imported as part of that import are correctly linked to the documents that are associated with it. So that was an interesting one too. Apparently we found out afterwards that in order to do that, it was a very extraneous process from the software company that we were importing into. I don't think it's really, but it was quite a bit of work, but just some of the interesting things that we've done kind of with the tool.
But that's capability that you need or the customer needs. Right?
Yeah, exactly. The really nice thing, I know Rick kind of said I'm the lead developer, but that's probably what I do less than 50% of my time. Actually working and implementing and finding out how we actually get things done is very important. And this is really giving me the platform to be able to do that. And it's really reaping benefits as we're going further into this, is that the next client gets the benefit of the last, you know, all that other stuff that we've been doing. And this platform has really given us some, the capabilities to do some of this stuff. Yeah. Going back to what Rick was saying, when we first started this, it was at a pure defense. We had all these boxes. They had multiple different sources. They had things in Word documents, and the people that were putting in their EDRMS system said, nope, there is no way we're getting that information out of there. And I'm like, well, that's not an option. So we built this, and yeah, so there was actually a couple custom screens with that project where they had source comparison screens where they had multiple sources with the same box information, and they actually went to the box, looked at it, had the two sources, and were validating which ones were actually correct. And yeah, so we did some stuff with that. And that was pretty interesting. I think of some of the other things. I'm not unable to show it today just because we're hooked up to the camera. We got a couple of like flashy things in here where we can actually take pictures of box labels. For the people that are in the room, I might be able to show that after we get off here, but I got a box label here. And essentially what we can do is we can pull up to the box like this and take a picture of this box label. Here, I'll probably show it on here. We take a picture of this box label, and on here it's got a box number. And from that box number, pull me up that box. So we can actually, I've got this on a tablet here. I think it died on the way here, but I'll load this up later too. You can actually go up to and take a picture of box labels, and this screen will actually show that picture, but then also grab the other information that's on here. So on here, I've got row bay bin, for example, where it is. So we take a picture of that, we see all the content that's in it, and the information associated. We can compare what's on the label to what we have in our databases and things like that. Yeah, so that's always been fun. Same thing with barcoding and that. You can take pictures of barcodes in the mobile app. Again, validate information. We can reclassify stuff from the mobile app. The mobile app has basic functionality where you can move boxes, basically. So you get a bunch of volumes, you're moving from one box to the other. You can reclassify stuff from that, or check in and check out, kind of that kind of idea as well. Some of the stuff I couldn't quite have it all shown today. Some people will probably notice the Documentum tab. This is a custom tab that's going to be, it's reporting. So from here, we can actually run reports against those other systems that we're connected to. So for this case, I actually had it connected to the Documentum system we exported to. Here, I can run things like volume reports from that system and use those as well. So this is kind of a Documentum module to WISPIR. Just to demonstrate some of the capabilities we're kind of doing with the plan.
Troy, maybe we should open for questions soon and then put our panel in place.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because just kind of wrap up what I was saying there. A lot of what I kind of just explained was the what and how. And what I was thinking is that, yeah, things like, when, who, and why are kind of the big questions I think would be appropriate for kind of the open discussion.
Okay, well, thanks, Troy, for giving us a view of that application, which you've got in a number of locations. And he was telling me about the fact that they've got business in the West Indies of all places. So what a gig. At any rate, if there are any of you out there online have any particular questions, or perhaps you've sent Rick a question, we would open it up to you to ask any questions, or maybe share if you've got a particular pain point in your organization that you just want to get off your chest as a bit of therapy. I think we're open to anything you might want to share and or give us in terms of information. So I would turn it over to you if there are questions out there. Just unmute your mic and rock on.
My name's Troy Sawyer, and I have a shared drive problem.
All right.
Is there anybody that actually likes SharePoint?
Yes. There are.
Just curious. Why?
I don't know. There are some benefits to it in that it is that if I'm working with a small set of documents in one place, and I'm collaboratively as well, it's one of its strengths as well. So that's where a lot of people are using it for. Now, as a content management system, it's tough to get the things that you really want.
Well, I think that's the problem is most people are using SharePoint for somehow some ad hoc.
As a collaboration tool.
Well, it's supposed to a collaboration tool.
And it is a great collaboration
But when
tool.
you're trying to use it in something, for a records management application, it really doesn't work that well.
Yeah.
No.
Now, some of the recent implementations I've been working with these guys, it's a company called StoneShare, actually, we're partnering with. Their onboarding process that they've been doing from going from shared drives to SharePoint has really been data driven. It's not been like a collaborative stuff. And you are getting those views where it's like, here, let me see my Finance 01 documents in that kind of not folder structure, more data driven views that they have. So some people are doing it in a way to try to accomplish those things that people want as records management people. So it is possible, but everyone's always been saying it for years, is that as a records manager, I have nightmares trying to deal with.
It requires a very high level of management and accuracy. And if you don't have that structure within your organization, and nobody does that I've ever met, then it just becomes a nightmare after a while. But
we were actually at one point working with a city municipality where I had this bright idea that I would create an app that you could have a side-by-side view. They were a Documentum shop, that they could just go into like a sit down like this with the people that were responsible for the SharePoint site and say, okay, tell me what I need to put away. So as a records management, you guys are done with this content, and they could just drag and drop their stuff into their documentum system. And it never came to fruition, but I wish it kind of would have, because that whole collaborative and records repository were separate, and they could keep them that way, but still manage the data at the end of the day. Yeah.
So I don't know, and you guys can all weigh in here, but from my point of view, if it's not integratable, then it's probably not a good tool to have, right? So, and I believe WISPIR is very integratable.
Yeah.
SharePoint's integratable with a lot of different systems, right? So
yeah.
That's kind of the key now, because there is no one size fits all for any kind of records management tool.
Yeah. Just a quick view of one of the things we're doing right now. We were talked about legacy databases.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to just tack onto a legacy database like this and say, in WISPIR, I have my attributes down the left-hand side, and it's basically saying, okay, my activity, get it from this column. And it actually gives you that view of what you're bringing from your old system and what's going to correspond to what's in WISPIR, and how you add more. Because here, this is coming from a legacy database that had no policies associated with this licensing kind of idea. When we were done getting the upgrade or the migration from the legacy database, we can then continue doing our record stuff on top of it as well. Yeah.
There are a couple of people here online who say they're actually using SharePoint. I think, Janet, you indicated in your shop you use SharePoint, and Jenny, you had a good point to make. You said you think SharePoint could be a great tool for the organization, but it has to be implemented properly and with a governance structure put in place, which is sort of echoes what Sandra was saying. Jenny, are you guys using SharePoint, and do you have such a governance structure in place? Yes, you are. Okay. So you are a fan of SharePoint?
No, but I think that's the point, is that SharePoint can be a valid thing, but it has to have that backbone or that support where it has a good records management program. I think what's happening is a lot of people are bringing in SharePoint is there,
right,
and they're looking at it as, well, we can somehow fix this so that we don't have to have the backbone, we don't have to have the records management in place. We'll use this instead of, and then it just becomes a mess, and I don't understand that thinking. That's just me personally. I don't understand the people that look at it. And for me, a great collaboration tool, and yes, absolutely can be used in conjunction for implementing records management, but you have to have that records management.
Sure.
Yeah. No, and I would agree with you 100%. Yeah. And I think for me, like if I was my own personal small business owner, SharePoint would be the way to go.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Because it's cost effective. You put that governance in place. You have a limited number of people who are accessing it and using it, and I think it's very effective that way. I think the problem that we get into in, especially in government organizations, you have such a high turnaround of employees, and you have everybody from, in our instance with highways, we have everybody that may be using this from a snowplow driver up to your deputy minister, right? And your varying levels of understanding and comprehension around technology comes into play. So it's very difficult to manage when you're I don't want to say managing the people as well, but really you have to take a look at, their knowledge when it comes to stuff like this, and then it becomes a nightmare.
Well, to add to that, Sandra, it's not only the individual, but everybody sees SharePoint as the next greatest thing. So they're jumping on it. There isn't very many parameters around it. There's no regulation on it really within a lot of companies. So everybody's running down that road. And then as records managers, we're kind of trying to reel them back in to say, okay, you're using it. How are you using it?
Yeah.
Clean it up and get our arms around it. So I think the can of worms is open. And I think they're running wild with SharePoint.
I don't think any organization, big or small, is going to get away from SharePoint, right? Because we use it. We just don't use it as a records management tool.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, sorry, as I say, I use it in my direct work only simply because we needed a tool whereby lawyers who are outside of the organization could have access to some of our records. So we had to have something that we could do that with. But yeah, it's just, I think it's one of those things that one day when I meet someone in person who loves it, I want to sit down, have some drinks with them, have them explain to me why.
Right.
I know I'll need alcohol for it. So.
Let me share with you some more comments here, because of course the group here cannot see these comments. But to your point, Angela, Jenny did confess that she did say that, if I got that right, Jen? Oh yeah, they had governance put in after they implemented SharePoint, ... LOL, right?
Yeah.
So that sort of confirms your notion that and Mike, your observation that people often think the package will solve the problem, but of course it all needs that work ahead of time in the governance structure as well. And both Laura and Janet and Laura, I asked about what's the scale of the operation we're talking about. In both their cases, they're talking about 100 people are roughly using this tool. In Laura's case, in Innovation Center at the U of R, they're using SharePoint as an intranet site, but as a records management tool, they're using OpenText. So that's a shill. I guess she gets money for that. Do you, Laura, to drop their name?
Yeah, because I believe Innovation Place in Saskatoon is also content server as well.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Oh, and here's, geez, Megan, okay. Megan, sorry, I keep thinking there's a long E there. Megan, and I believe, Megan, you're in the, you're out in the Potash outfit, right? It says here, they use SharePoint, Potash mining, yeah. So she's saying they're using, oh my God, for thousands of users.
Wow.
And it's very unstructured at this stage.
Is that a lot of different sites, or a lot of people accessing information from a few sites? I'm kind of curious, because I know a lot of municipalities are pushing out team site-based kind of ideas.
Okay.
I'll see if I can chime in on the phone. It's Megan. We have a lot of users accessing multiple points, and we have users who can create their own SharePoints.
Yeah. See, that's
you can imagine the repercussions of that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, you know what? I think your thousands, I'm going to trump you with our potentially 43,000 users, where they're looking at creating a provincial SharePoint site for the new authority. And I haven't heard anybody say that that's going to be administered at any level other than e-health or IT or something.
Yeah, but you see, it's not having it for, depends what the purpose is for SharePoint, right?
Yeah.
If they're going to have it as a collaboration tool, or maybe like a website
to access content.
Yeah, like access content, fine. But
Yeah.
then maybe have it integrated with another system that is actually going to help you manage the content on those sites,
Sure.
right? Because to actually use it for managing the content, I'm happy I'm not at eHealth, because I would run screaming from the building.
Yeah.
From the Whisper tool, we could do it passively. So we can look at that and have it put in classification on those and then report on them.
See, that's what I'm saying with the SharePoint.
SharePoint?
Yeah, using your SharePoint, somehow you have to get the user, get past the just simple collaboration and saying, this is now specific content. And if you get them to assign a content at that point, then we're halfway there to the records management requirement, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's almost the change management, Troy, that you talked about earlier, is individuals can go on there and use it as collaboration, but there's another catch that you have to assign a classification or retention.
When you're talking about that, then you're talking about having to have a very effective records management program. And I know the people at eHealth are very dedicated, but I don't think they have the funds, and I don't think they have the staff to be able to deal with that many people.
But they actually, eHealth itself is not responsible, and I don't work here anymore, so I shouldn't be.
That's true.
But I do know they're actually not responsible for managing all that content. They're responsible for providing services around that content, right? So if they do, and maybe their services are changing, so I really shouldn't speak to that, but perhaps that is a service that they're going to provide, is the management of that content. But then you have to have agreements in place for them to manage other people's content.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's whoever is responsible for, in order to make something like that work, there has to be the training in place.
Yes.
And I think that's another thing that's a really, is that, you know, I think Dan and I used to talk a lot when we were both at the archives about how information management, records management has to be a real top-down thing, that you have to have the support at the top, because if people at the top know that this is going to make things better for you, in the end you're going to save money, then they'll give you the resources. And without the resources to train staff properly on how to use something like SharePoint, to, when you put in that document, that you add in all of the, you know, you add in information.
Yes. Yeah.
Then without that, you'll never get to even that point.
Nice.
And you can put things on Learn, but I mean,
but there's so much more to this that people don't realize, right? Because we're not just talking about records management anymore, right? Because you're also looking at data management, and you're also looking at perhaps maybe template management, right? Around your, like, it's part of your document management. But there's so many different scenarios that you have to have in place before you just jump in and dump stuff in a system.
Absolutely.
And that top down or bottom up, however you want to do it, unless they understand like the intricacies that are involved in that, you're going to end up with a mess every time.
Well, I always think of top down as a support.
You know,
having the people at the top realize the importance and putting the stress on it. And I think that's why Australia is mine.
You know, but no, you're absolutely right, because from my standpoint, and I've said this to my analysts before, when we go to talk to the executive, we're in like the marketing ploy here, right? We need to sell them on this, because if we walk out of that room and they're silent, we've lost, right? Because with executives, you know, if they're interested in something, they ask questions and they want to know more. But if they're silent, it's kind of like, lost the crowd.
Yeah.
It's like being a comedian telling a joke and nobody laughs.
No, exactly.
In there.
No, that is it, because if you don't, if they don't see the importance of it, and they don't see how this is supported, they won't support it. And then when their staff go and say, oh, why do we need to do this? They're going to go, it's not that important.
Can I interject here at that point? Because I think it's a great segue, just what you finished up, because Megan, I think, now has tapped into what we described as perhaps the therapy part of this, where she's asking, so where do you think you should start when you're trying to convince your organization that all this content, right, is an issue and you should care about it? So, you know, I pose it to you guys and the rest of that audience. How do you convince your leadership to address it? And Megan suggests that it's not just a records management issue.
Honestly, I'll be very honest with you, records management gets you nowhere. If you go to your executive and you say, you know what, we want to improve records management, they say, thanks for coming out. Right? You got to find something that is like, pulls at their heartstrings, right? For us, it was access to information and FOIs, right? So every time an FOI did not achieve its date, or, you know, there was some issue, they couldn't find the records, or they found them too late, or whatever, I would go back and say, you know what, this isn't an FOI issue, this is a records management issue. If we had better records management, this would not be a problem here at all.
Absolutely.
Right? So you have to tie it to something that they're passionate about. And I think in the different industries that you have to take a look at, you know, what services you're providing and find out what's sensitive for your executive. And
when I worked for the city of Wetaskiwin, we got a new city director in, and he was very passionate about digitization. He didn't understand for the archive side of things, because he thought you could just, you know, digitize half a million negatives and then throw them out. So that beside that, for the information management side of it, that was his thing. He wanted to go paperless, and so I was very lucky that when because he actually created a position so that there was leadership in information management, and that was the sell. And I was very lucky that I had his support, because when we get resistance. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. You have to find the end. For me, it's generally been cost savings, because it's like you almost have to go to your executive director or your director or your supervisor or whoever, get them excited about it and try and keep pitching it up line. But that's why the bottom up approach is so key, because you're working against the current.
You're absolutely right. And when you look at stuff like that, every time we go to them and try to pitch something, we look at the ROI on it, and we also look at the cost benefit analysis. And we do that to get the buy-in from them, to show them like exactly where are you going to be saving money, how is this helping us?
Yeah.
And then especially for us in government environments, you want to make sure that, you know, anything that you're doing is, especially when it's public facing, can be successful, right? Because in the public, when you're dealing with taxpayers' funds, right? You don't want something to fail, because as soon as it fails, it's in the media and you hear about it and it's all bad, right? But realistically, things fail before you get it right. So you have to be very diligent trying to do your homework and get it to that point where you're fairly confident that you're not going to fail in whatever endeavor it is that you're undertaking.
Often too, with especially with Whisper and some of the projects we've been doing, that first project, like you said, is as soon as you get that first one to succeed, and you usually go after the low-hanging fruit, right? Yeah. Something that you know a lot about, stuff that you can show a dramatic improvement in right from the beginning. That's definitely been how we get the next project and how you get to go on to the next thing and implement it in other places and things like that.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that I think that some of the groups, and we're one of them, we have a SharePoint team on site. So for me as a records manager, to deal with them and to get them on board and buy into it, so that when they're giving out the licenses and when they're talking to the next potential SharePoint user, they've already got a little bit of convincing from me. And so now they pass it on to them and say, by the way, you should be thinking about this as you're developing the site and your retention around it. And what are we going to do with it afterwards? So they're already planting the seeds as to what do we need from a records management point of view with that potential customer. So now it's not an earth-shattering response to say, well, I didn't know anything about that, and I'm already down the road on my SharePoint site, and all this information is collected, and I'm not going to do anything more with it, because they've been convinced or they've been notified up front. And so for me, one thing that I would say to everyone is, if you have a group that is dedicated to rolling out the SharePoint or being mentors, if you will, convince them and get them on board too. I have that relationship, and I've found that it's really a good step forward. I mean, it's not the ultimate yet. We still have work to do, but at least the seed's been planted up front when Dan comes in and knocks on the door for another SharePoint site and wants to be running 110 miles an hour. At least he knows that this is the speed limit. Here's some of the potential governance that's going to be needed. Here's some of the potential training that Angela talked about. So these are the types of things that I think that central person can act as our representatives as well.
And you know, the other thing I found too is, especially when you're speaking with the executive, it's okay to say, I don't know, right? Yeah. So many people, they try to fudge the answer, oh, we can make it work or whatever. But you know what, to sit there in front of all your executive and say, you know what, I don't know, let me get back to you on that, or let me do some research, or I'll find out. Those are all okay things to say, because nobody really has the answer to everything, and if you do,
and it's the thing, if you try to answer it and you don't know, it looks so much worse if it just comes back when you gave the wrong information.
Not if it comes back, but when it comes back.
Because it always does. It always does.
And especially as records managers, since we're talking from the records management point of view, that's often the case where you're handed the responsibility of classifying records in the organization, and somebody hands you, hey, here's this other source, and you look around the room and go, I have no idea where to even begin with this. And that's going back to the who, is like, find that person that is responsible for the content, or that you can hop on board with to say, you know, let's do something with this rather than just make the wrong call.
Sure.
Right?
So Troy, is from your experience and on the projects that you worked on with your outfit, is there a common driver that you know has compelled a business to engage in this kind of work is there a reason more than others? Is it a cost-benefit analysis? Is it a risk, a fear of risk and reputation?
It's been very variable. I can tell you, especially as we're doing a little bit more in the States right now, legal comes up a lot more.
So
there's a lot of drive just because of the nature of the States. Yeah. That being said, a lot of the drivers, because with our company specifically, we have a lot of long-term clients. And what really gets them going is being excited about what they're doing as well. Okay. So yes, there's the important things like cost, benefit, and all those kinds of things. Nothing starts unless that's fulfilled.
Right.
But as soon as you have somebody on board, like one we're working on now, I was working in Halifax at the beginning of the year. This lady was the most gracious person that I took this 45-minute job and we took it down to a 45-second button to. That just drove everything else that they wanted to do. So going back to what I was saying, that for success, when you get people on board, you can't get there without the other things we've been talking about, of course, but the people have been a huge part of when the next project comes or what the next project is. Yeah.
And you're learning, right? You're continuing to build on each and every one of those. So exactly. It's a learning process, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said that about the litigation, because I can speak from experience that had that been a driving force, not anything, but had that been, because my job with the Ministry of Health, I mean, essentially I was working on collecting records for litigation across the entire executive government and the Crown Treasury boards. And nobody knew what records they had. And it made things so much harder because some ministries literally had thousands of boxes and all they had was administrative records written on it.
Yeah.
And
the big thing that comes up, the word that's buzzword right now around this particular thing is defensible disposition, physical and electronic.
Well, and one of the things that was really interesting, and one of the things that I've learned a lot in my job is that when you're in big litigation, the person responsible for gathering all your evidence, when you're a big industry or a big corporation or you're a big government, that person has to go to court and defend your records management.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to lawyers when saying to them, oh, nobody told me I had to do this when I was hired for the job.
Okay, I'm cognizant of the time. We have 3 minutes left to our 3 o'clock shutdown. If there are any more questions or comments in the room here, pose them. I've asked if there are any more questions out there on the interweb, and everybody has gone silent, so that's either a good thing or not a good thing. Megan, I hope we were able to address your issue in some ways, and for the rest of you, issues, sorry, they're not issues, they're challenges. We all have these challenges. But if there aren't any more questions, if there are no more questions to pose, let me just say a quick thank you to our board of panelists here in the room. I hope they've been able to provide you with some relief and comfort that you're not alone out there. I would like to say especially to Troy, from having driven down all the way from Saskatoon to share his experience and expertise with this tool with us. And then of course, Rick, to provided us as be our host today and give us a sense of how you guys are taking on what it sounds like exciting work and sharing your colleague with us. For those of you, tell your friends we are going to post this so that you can revisit it and relive the memories, and maybe sort of get some content that you may have missed. At any rate, we're pleased that you spent some time with us. We hope this has been useful, and we hope to see you again at our next presentation in the new year. Look for details coming soon about that. So I'm going to sign off now and say goodbye to everybody, and we're all waving. Okay, goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Rick. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.